Almost every Black American family has the story. Somewhere in the family tree, there's a Cherokee grandmother, a Creek grandfather, a Native ancestor who gave someone their high cheekbones or their straight hair. It gets passed down like gospel, but then the DNA test comes back, and there's nothing there. No Native ancestry. So what happened? Was the story always a lie, or did something else erase it? Stay with us, because the answer is more documented than most people realize. To answer that, we have to go back further than most people are willing to go. Not to the Civil War, not even to the plantation. We have to go back to the very beginning of the colonial period. Because the relationship between Black people and Native people in America didn't start with romance. It started with something much darker. And understanding that beginning changes everything that comes after it. Most people don't know this. Before African slavery became the dominant system in America, the English were enslaving Native Americans. From the 1680s through 1715, thousands of Native people, mostly women and children, were kidnapped from the Carolinas and Virginia and sold. Some were shipped as far as the Caribbean. The Native American slave trade grew so large it actually eclipsed the fur trade as the primary source of commerce in South Carolina. This is documented. This is in the colonial record. So, why did the system switch from Native to African labor? 4 reasons. First, Native people escaped constantly. They were on their own land. They knew the terrain. They knew which direction to run. Second, European diseases had already collapsed Native populations. The supply simply ran out. Third, enslaving local tribes meant provoking military retaliation. Pennsylvania actually passed a law in 1705 banning Carolina Indian slaves, specifically because it risked war with the Iroquois Confederacy. The 4th reason is the one most people never hear. The English developed a deliberate trade loop. Native American men, considered the most dangerous to keep locally, were shipped to Caribbean colonies and exchanged directly for African enslaved people. It became a calculated swap. Native men out, African men in. And the people caught in the middle of that transition, and the ones who were already both didn't get reclassified as Native. They got absorbed into the Black category entirely. Before that transition completed, there was a period where enslaved Africans and enslaved Native Americans lived and worked side by side on the same plantations. They shared quarters, shared food, shared remedies and languages, and they intermarried. African men significantly outnumbered African women in the early slave population. Native women and children were disproportionately the ones enslaved locally. The demographic math alone tells you mixing was inevitable. This wasn't romance. This was survival inside a shared cage. Then, in 1740, South Carolina passed a slave code that formalized the erasure. That law declared that all Negroes, Indians, mulattoes, and their offspring, and this is a direct reading, shall be and remain hereafter absolute slaves. Virginia had already passed a similar law in 1670, defining slavery as a lifelong inheritable racial status. Together, these laws did something specific. Mixed people who were genuinely both Black and Native, were legally reclassified as Black. Their Native identity didn't disappear from the bloodline. It was deleted from the record. This is the first reason the family story survived, but the DNA didn't. But we have to be honest about the second reason too. In the early 20th century, Claiming Native ancestry carried social status. It helped some black families distance themselves from the stigma of purely African descent. Straight hair, lighter skin, certain facial features, all got attributed to native blood rather than to the sexual violence of slavery. The story was sometimes true. Sometimes it was a coping mechanism. Often, it was both simultaneously. Now let's talk about the science directly. Commercial DNA tests like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA work by comparing your genetic markers against reference populations. Here is the first problem. Native American reference populations in these databases are severely underrepresented. There are hundreds of distinct tribal nations, and very few have contributed DNA samples to these databases at scale. So the algorithm has limited data to match against to begin with. Here is the second problem, and this one is scientific fact. Every generation, you inherit roughly 50% of each parent's DNA. By the fourth generation, your great-great-grandparent, you're expressing on average about 6% of their DNA. By the sixth generation, it drops to around 1.5%. By the 10th generation, you are statistically likely to carry 0 detectable DNA from a specific ancestor, even if that ancestor was 100% Native American. The mixing we documented happened 10 to 12 generations ago for most Black American families. The math alone explains the negative result. So, when your test comes back negative, here is what that scientifically means. The test did not detect native ancestry within its detection threshold, using its current reference database. That is the complete and accurate statement. It does not mean the ancestor didn't exist. It does not mean the family story is false. It means the biological signal, if it was ever there, has diluted below what current technology can reliably identify. Negative is not proof of absence. It is a limit of detection. Now, let's talk about where the documented mixing is strongest. The Seminole Nation is the clearest case. Black people weren't just adjacent to the Seminoles. They were leaders within the nation. They fought in a 42-year war against the United States government. Black Seminoles had their own settlements, spoke their own dialect, and held recognized status within the nation. This is in the federal record. The 5 civilized tribes also legally granted citizenship to their freedmen after the Civil War. That is treaty law. That is not opinion. But here is what happened next. In recent decades, several of these same tribes moved to strip freedmen descendants of their citizenship. The Cherokee Nation voted in 2007 to remove them from the tribal rolls entirely. It took federal lawsuits and decades of legal fighting before those rights were restored. At cultural events, tribal councils began demanding enrollment cards. Darker-skinned people got carded. Lighter-skinned people didn't. The racism America built didn't stay outside the nations. It moved in. And the people who paid the price were the ones with the most documented claim to belong. There is one more claim worth addressing, honestly. The argument that the original Paleo-Americans, the very first people on this continent, were Black or African in phenotype, and that today's Native Americans are later Asian migrants. This argument circulates heavily in Black American spaces and carries real emotional weight. There is fringe academic support for pieces of it, but mainstream archaeology and population genetics do not support it as a settled conclusion. We can hold that honestly, acknowledge the argument exists, acknowledge why it resonates, without presenting it as proven. So, let me speak directly to you now. If you grew up with the story, the native grandmother, the ancestor nobody could name, you want a real answer. Here it is, broken down by what the data actually supports. If your DNA test came back positive, that result is real. The history we just walked through explains exactly how it got there. Through shared bondage, through the Seminole Nation, through documented mixing in the Southeast. You are not imagining it, and you don't need to defend it. If your test came back negative, here is what science says you should actually conclude. The mixing most likely occurred 10 to 12 generations ago. At that generational distance, statistical inheritance means the DNA signal may simply be gone. Not because the ancestor didn't exist, but because 50% dilution per generation is a biological law, not an opinion. Combined with severely limited native reference databases, a negative result cannot scientifically confirm your ancestor wasn't there. There is also a third case, the one where the mixing happened. The ancestry was real, but the 1740 slave codes and every law that followed reclassified your ancestors as black before any record was ever kept. Their native identity wasn't lost. It was administratively deleted. Your family held on to the story because the story was the only thing the law couldn't confiscate. So, what should you actually think? Think of this. The story your grandmother told you came from somewhere. It survived slavery, survived legal erasure, survived generations of people who had every reason to let it go and chose not to. A negative DNA test means the biological trail went cold. It does not mean the trail never existed. The historical record, the colonial laws, the demographic data, and the science of generational DNA dilution all say the same thing. You cannot be told it's impossible. And now you know exactly why.